Welcome to We Are Venomaniacs, the Venom Site's official podcast for all of your symbiote news, reviews, and point of views. My name is Orion, and I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts, Carlos
Yo, what up, people?
and Tyler.
Hello!
We're also joined today by a super special guest host from the Marvel Bullpen and the star of this episode, Scream, Curse of Carnage scribe Clay McLeod Chapman. A most welcome and gracious welcome to you, Clay.
Thank you very much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, man. I mean, I don't know if you've listened to our podcast, but every time we review a Scream issue, we're gushing over it. It's just solid gold so far, and it's just been a real joy. At least I have said that it's probably one of the best symbiote books on the shelves right now.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie to you. Of course I come to you guys. I have been I've been listening habitually, and it has been honestly a godsend that readers like yourselves and everybody who's joining us right now. I mean, I honestly cannot say it enough. I mean, it just means the world to me. Thank you so much for bringing Scream to life.
Yeah, no problem. And so we have a few questions for you from our hosts here, and then we'll open it up to the community who are listening in right now live if we have the time, because I know that we have some time constraints with your schedule. So we will try to keep this as brief as possible for our listeners so they can get their questions in as well. So let's go ahead and get the ball rolling. Carlos, let's start with you.
So, Clay, I have a question for you. So, my question is, what led or inspired you to become a writer in the first place?
I mean, it's funny because I'll be totally frank. Like I was a terrible student growing up, and as early as sixth grade, like I think I was failing English, and took a teacher, my sixth grade English teacher pulling me aside to kind of give me the riot act, say like I was going to be failing her class and repeating sixth grade if I didn't bump my grade up. And she totally struck a deal with me and said, hey, if you do something that's outside of class, that's kind of in tandem to the stuff that we're doing in class, I'll give you a little extra credit. And lo and behold, she like pointed to this poster in her classroom, a writing contest. I never wanted to write, never thought about writing, never imagined myself as a writer. Just wanted to pass sixth grade English. But I knew if I entered this contest a bunch of times, I could get more extra credit and therefore really pass sixth grade. So I entered three of the most craptacular short story plays you've ever read. And it led to getting the extra credit, moving on to seventh grade. I get a letter in the mail like a month later saying, congratulations, you've won. And it completely threw me for a loop, and it just turned my life around. And I realized, slowly but surely, still a terrible student, that writing and storytelling in particular was something that I really wanted to do. And I kind of accidentally kind of stumbled into it. But to, not to draw this out too much, for talking specifically about comic book writing, I honestly wholeheartedly owe everything to one person. That is Ellie Pyle, my very first editor at Marvel Comics. This is like fast forwarding to 2001-ish, maybe 2, 3. But I was teaching a high school playwriting workshop. And Ellie, who was really like a junior, senior in high school at that time, was in this class, and it just by happenstance that we met when she was in high school. And then however many years later, she graduates from college, moves to New York, becomes in either an intern or associate editor at Marvel Comics, and that's when our paths converged, I guess you could say. And she came to a reading that I was doing probably in like 2009-ish. And she said, hey, she came up to me afterwards and she was like, hey, remember me? I don't know if you'd ever be interested in this, but have you ever thought about writing for Marvel Comics for Spider-Man? And, anyone ever asks a question like that, the immediate answer is just yes. I took a lunch meeting with her and Steve Wacker, and I pitched my ideas for Spider-Man. I basically kind of got my start, cutting my teeth writing those back 9, back 10 page, those PSA style pagers at the back of Spider-Man, like Spider-Man learns to do his laundry. But that's how it all began for me.
Oh, very, very, very fascinating. Well, thanks for answering the question.
Long-winded, I know, but it's all Ellie's fault. Blame Ellie Pyle wherever you are.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Ellie.
Well, I mean, I won't riff, I swear. But that said, she, the higher up, she moved on, up the totem pole, editorially speaking. Every so often she would be like, hey, have you ever thought about writing something for this or writing for something like this? And, I basically just followed her wherever she needed somebody to go. I know we kind of talked really briefly about Edge of Spider-Verse, but that was Ellie. All Ellie.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And then Tyler, do you have a question?
Yeah, speaking of you becoming a writer and whatnot, we know you had some experience with symbiotes first in the Edge of Venomverse with the Deadpool issue, and then we also in obviously Absolute Carnage, the awesome separation anxiety issue. On top of you did all the psych evals, I believe, at the end of the issues, and then also some of the. So some like the post-credit scenes leading up to Absolute Carnage.
The stingers, I think they're called. They call them.
Yeah, but my question is actually, speaking of becoming a writer of all, so you were doing the symbiote stuff, but how did you become the actual writer of Scream? Because was Marvel impressed with the other books you handled in Absolute Carnage and asked if you were interested, or were you just given free reign to pick a character?
All right, that's a good question, and So, at a certain point, my kind of editorial transition from Ellie moved to Devin Lewis, and Devin and Danny have been my editors there for really like a couple years now. And how did it start? Honestly, I think it was the separation anxiety story. Devin had asked me to do the Edge of Venomverse, which was Deadpool and Venom coming together, which was a total lark. I just wanted to riff off of my love for the Thing, and I got to work with James Stucco, so I was just like over the moon. But I
love that little that symbiote heart he did in that issue.
Yeah, totally.
That was pretty cute.
I approached that one as if it was a romantic comedy by way of John Carpenter. I know it was a little cornball, but I have a fondness for it. But it was definitely separation anxiety that I think was the real turning point. And when Devin reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to write this for the kind of Life Foundation symbiotes?" I was like, "Yeah, this would be awesome." And Brian and I really wanted to tell the gnarliest, scariest story we could tell. Really treat it as if it was just a complete one-off, a really isolated kind of enclosed story. Even though there's like it kind of bridges the gap between where we left the symbiotes to where we send them off at the end of the issue. Just really saw it as kind of like a really grounded, horror story.
Speaking of Carpenter, with the Thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you will find more often than not when I get to write for these characters, it's going to be a complete and utter ripoff of either Alien or the Thing. And that's where my heart lies. That's where my heart goes. I'll chalk up to it. Yeah. Because of separation anxiety and how, I mean, it seemed, I think, to do well, or well enough, or it kind of left an impression on Devon that I think whatever kind of internal conversations they were having, they knew they wanted to do something Scream at some point on the line. And Devon approached me and said, "How would you feel about writing for Scream? And what would be the storyline that you would want to pitch for someone like Scream?" And at that point, it was me kind of living within the world of Andy and Scream. And I'm going to get this wrong, so nobody can quote me on this 100%. But I think there was a kind of transition of who was going to be taking the mantle of the symbiote, like who would be the host for Scream. And when it was decided that it would be Andy, that was all information that was kind of given to me. Knew that my host and my symbiote would be Andy and Scream.
Okay, so you weren't like up to date with what was going on until Buns decided and then that Andy would be Scream. It was sort of handed to you.
It was he was writing and they were working on his Trinity, the kind of trilogy with Absolute Carnage. So it was the kind of dovetailing into where would this story go from there. And for me, when I kind of did the deep dive into Andy and her relationship with the symbiote, the things that I always came back to was this idea of family and in particular motherhood. And those were the kind of big kind of headlight, high beam kind of macro themes that were really, really important for me to address. When it came to kind of having that kind of initial conversation with Devon and Danny about what would be the story that I want to tell, would be, how does someone like Andy, who has been, her heart has just been raked over the coals, and everybody who is important in her life has either left, died. I just wanted that to be the kind of cornerstone or the kind of foundation for rebuilding of Andy and her relationship with Scream. Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, no, it does. It does. So separation anxiety sounds like it was the big turning point for you to become the writer of Scream.
I think that's what did it, or that's the story that I'm going to stick to. And if anyone wants to say otherwise, I will totally eat crow.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent. So you, Chris Mooneyham, Gary Brown, and colorist Rain Barretto have done a stellar job with Andy and Scream's first ongoing series, especially in mixing horror with symbiotes. In fact, the mix of horror with symbiotes seems to be just the fusion Marvel needs in its symbiote books. You first dabbled with horror and symbiotes with Brian Level and Jordan Boyd in Absolute Carnage Separation Anxiety, which was one of the best tie-ins for the event, in my opinion. And as we've heard, you also kind of began with the Edge of Venomverse Deadpool. And before those was also the great Carnage series by Jerry Conway, Mike Perkins, and Andy Troy. So what is your take on mixing symbiotes with other literary genres beyond superheroes? And what are some other genres you think you'd like to mix symbiotes with given the chance? And who would you like to team up with those in the series?
My God. It's a tough one. I mean, I feel like, I was so great about working with Chris and Gary and Rain that, there was kind of an actual conversation that was had amongst us collectively. It was definitely a conversation that was had kind of independently amongst the kind of all of those involved, where really we wanted this to feel rainy and gritty, and thinking specifically in terms of those kind of like 70s kind of not grindhouse per se, but the kind of like early era kind of noir infused 70s drama / crime thrillers of that era. Like I'm thinking like Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, even like like basically any Al Pacino film, where there's a certain kind of celluloid template to those films that I think carries over into the first arc. We almost wanted to kind of treat each arc as if it were the beginning of its own Law and Order episode, but kind of circa 1974. Where I think back to that first issue that Mooneyham did, where you kind of have that opening establishing scene with the two detectives underneath the bridge. They've kind of uncovered this body. Like this is all, we really wanted that kind of procedural element, but really kind of infuse it with something that felt this could almost be a movie that was made, by Alan Pakula or some of the amazing filmmakers of the 70s. Yeah, I think that in terms of kind of fusing of genres and genres, my go-to is always going to be horror, because that's the content that I imbibed, continue to imbibe. I started when I was when I was a kid, and I'll sneak downstairs at midnight still to watch a spooky movie, because that's just what I grew up on and what I continue to grow up on. So I think what I find amazing about symbiotes in particular, this is my take on them. Someone else would totally disagree, maybe disagree. I think of them, I always want to come at them from a place of relationships. I always think that the thing that I found most compelling about all of the symbiote comics that I read, that there was always a navigation of two. It was never just one. It was always how do we come together to an understanding of and a mutual kind of agreement of how to share, whether you want to call that love, family. I don't know. Those things are big deals to me. I love that, even if you're decapitating somebody or swallowing somebody's head, still about a relationship. In terms of kind of mixing genres, or where do our symbiotes go from here? If I close my eyes, it's always going to be horror. I think that there's something kind of inherent to these symbiote narratives that's actually something more romantic. Maybe I should say romantic in air quotes. There's a dynamic, a relationship dynamic that always has to be explored. Yeah, that's almost my answer.
Excellent. Yeah, I agree that when you're talking about symbiotes, you can't leave out the romance of it. Like you said, this relationship aspect between host and symbiote. So yeah, definitely that. And I agree that these days I now see symbiotes as horror characters, because it's just frightening. You got this alien goo from outer space twisting you into a monster and everything. It's like, yeah, it's some horrifying stuff. So I think it works very well myself.
Yeah, and I'd absolutely agree. You're showing that relationship stuff excellently in the Scream book with Andy and the Scream symbiote.
Yeah. I would say some of the best horror out there actually deals, before you get to the scary stuff, you have to have the kind of human emotional content, the kind of relationship content. And that's the stuff that you can ground your characters in something that comes from a place of fundamental emotional understanding. Then you bring in the chainsaws, then you bring in the alien goo, and then you've kind of, you as the reader or the audience are identifying with these characters in a way. So I don't know if I always thread the needle or if I always get it right, but in terms of Andy and Scream, every decision should come from a place of well, how does Andy react to this, and how does Scream react to this, and how do they have to react together? And that tug of war is I feel is the kind of relationship that it's never just one person making the decision; it's the two of them making the decision. And if one of them oversteps, and it's like, well, what does that mean in our relationship?
And I also see, because Andy and Scream, they really do make the perfect duo together. And as I've been reading the book, I also it's also like seeing the same thing with Eddie and Venom. So it's a really good combination between the two.
Awesome. That's a huge relief to hear.
Yep. All right, Tyler, you have another question for us?
Yes, I do. So, in the latest issue, we got some new villains, and I just want to ask, how on earth did you think to pull out the most obscure villains ever from an X-Men PSA and introduce a new horror vibe to them? Like, Big Mother was already really obscure enough, but the Creeps, that's the deepest cut I've ever seen for a comic. And I'm a continuity whore, so I love it. I love it.
I've been dying to put the Creeps into something for so long. I mean, on a rainy day a while back, there was this. There's like a website or a place that you could go to on the internet that's basically just a Marvel villain database. This was years ago. This was pre-Scream. I just spent a day looking through all of these. It's alphabetized, so you just go through each. Here are all the A villains. Here are all the B villains, C villains, D villains. And this is how I first learned about people like Mother, the Creeps. And then kind of having the ability to kind of go back and find read their stories and find out about them. Something so specific about the Creeps that I just found so terrifying. And they only had one appearance, and it was this like blockbuster video promo tie-in PSA. It was like cheese beyond
danger,
cheese.
Kids.
yeah it was a total stranger danger. It was like, don't get in the car with strangers. I mean, but there was something so benevolent and so loving and caring about them. Like, oh my God, it was because they were basically the henchmen of X-Man. It wasn't even that they were the big baddies. It was that they were the kind of like Igor to this other kind of knockoff of the X-Men, who was X-Man. And it was some like schlubby, not very physically, he was not a superhero. He was just like if we're being totally frank, he was just a pedophile in spandex, and he was basically like using the Creeps to lure kids in to awful things. This was a blockbuster comic. Like, this was like I don't know how it came to be, but it's out there. I don't know if you can find copies anymore, but was a profoundly unnerving comic, because if you just dig a little bit underneath the surface, you realize like what it is that they're suggesting, and it's awful. The Creeps just scared me. It's basically saying your grandparents are like the file Igors for X-Man, and I just held on to them for so long. And when Devin and Danny, they were like, "Hey, who are some of the bad guys that we can talk about for this first arc for Scream?" And I was like, "The Creeps." They were like, "Who?" And like, "Just find the Creeps. Like, just give me the Creeps. That's all I want." And they were like, "Not yet, no." So then I was like, "Okay, I want Big Mama." They're like, "Okay, that's better." And then when it came to the second arc, I was like, "Please just give me the Creeps for one issue." And they relented. So yeah. And I gotta say, like, in terms of Mooneyham's artwork for 6, it reminds me of those kind of Mad Magazine. Oh man, I'm gonna totally blank. But what was the Mad Comics? Mad Magazine had their own kind of horror spin-off comic. There's no way I'm going to be able to get it, but like, I feel like Mooneyham nailed that kind of period with issue 6, and particularly how he drew Creep. So I think it's some of my favorite stuff.
Yeah, it is really, really awesome. So, Orion, I think this sort of ties. We're talking about speaking of Big Mother. I think this ties into your next question.
Yeah. So you ended up with the enviable job of redefining a D-list supervillain into an Avengers-level threat for Scream with Big Mother. So how much of the revamping process was you, and how much was editorial? Like, did you collaborate with Donny Cates in the process, considering Big Mother's new ties to his characters Null and Grendel?
No, I really feel like a lot of this chalks up to just kind of gratuitous timing and a little bit of kismet. I can't claim anything other than coming to the table with Big Mother. So when we had that first kind of discussion editorially about what this first arc would be, and I came in guns blazing with this idea of motherhood and idea of Andy, who has, like one of the first questions was like, no, Andy's lost her father, but what about her mom? Her mother, and you guys maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but like her mother had always been this kind of non-entity who was never discussed.
I think when she first appeared, it was just her and her dad. I don't think we ever saw anything about her mom.
Yeah, and that just felt like a big open. I wanted to go there. I wanted that. Because Andy's not only, what is the relationship between Andy and her mother? What is the relationship between Andy and Scream? And, they're kind of navigating their new relationship and evolving relationship. It wasn't so specific that I wanted Scream to be a mother figure to Andy, that kind of, what kind of parental, if not maternal instincts, would a symbiote have for their host? Then Big Mother comes into the fold, and be completely honest, it started, at least initially, as like, oh, who could be the bad guy in a story about motherhood? Well, let's get Big Mama into the fold. Then doing a lot more digging into the idea of this villain, this character, Big Mama. Evan and Danny were like, I said Big Mama. I was like, I want to do Big Mama because this is where that character kind of exists. They were like, like, shut the front door. Like, that's crazy. Do you know who Big Mama is? It ties into this whole other corridor with Null and Grendel, and this is perfect because all of a sudden now we can kind of crack open this story. And I was just like, oh yeah, I totally, and that was totally my idea. And it was just like the happiest of accidents, because it basically kind of took our story and opened it up and connected it to the larger acro story that Donnie has been telling. And it really I just kind of lucked into it. So yeah, that is kind of my clumsy answer to that question.
Well, just a happy little accident of this turning this into a symbiote character that happened to have big teeth.
I mean, I found the kind of what Big Mother did in Captain Marvel is interesting. Like this idea of like her becoming like a WWF wrestler, or like a pro wrestler. Like she's like slipped off into the wrestling ring. Like that to me was kind of like, okay, I get it. But I just felt like there could be more to that character. And then when we got to Beowulf and Grendel, and the kind of mythos that opened up, it was just like, it really became a foundation for telling this other story within the first arc of, Grendel's mother losing her child, and the kind of pain and anger and rage that's kind of been rooted deep within mother for all of these centuries, so that when she comes to the table and encounters Andy and Scream, is mother basically coming to reclaim the child of Scream. Yeah, motherhood was just like, it was just everywhere and anywhere, and any decision had to be based upon that kind of like dynamic of child and mother, if not daughter and mother.
Awesome. So just the perfect storm.
Yeah, totally.
Very good. Very good.
All right. Well, I have another question then. Rotating away from the villain talk for a little bit, I consider myself the #1 Flash Thompson fan, and I don't think it's any surprise that I have a question that involves him. So, obviously, Agent Venom was integral in Andy becoming a symbiote character, but I want to know, how important would you consider that? How important is Flash to her? Because we've seen bits of him throughout the run, and you seemingly put him on the same level of her parents. So, like with some of those flashback scenes, and like what she's has trauma from. So it's like, so I'm curious.
I mean, I feel like I have a guarded answer, and in essence, I feel like when it comes to Flash and Andy at any point in her life, she makes the decision to open up to somebody or connect, I feel like that has to come at a great cost. Her and the kind of emotional toll it takes for someone like her to kind of establish any sort of trust, or just to say yes, I think has to be a real huge risk. Because every time she does it, she loses them, like, or they leave. And I think when Flash and her kind of encountered one another, the toll that took, I don't know. Like, I think that, like, for me, it hurts, and I think it hurt her. So I want to, I don't know how much we could talk about the future going forward, but I do know that, like, on a level of Andy, any opening or kind of like embracing of someone new into her life, regardless of where they came into her life, it's gonna affect her in profound ways, and I do think that did with Flash. Flash is such a character that is like out of my hands, so it's like, what can I say about him? So at least on the Andy side, yeah.
This is just me being more. This is me being as desperate as possible for more Flash content. So
we are hoping.
I have faith they'll bring him back, but I just gotta wait. So.
You never know. You never know.
Fools.
Never say die.
Excellent. All right. So recently we had some news that really affected issue 6 and moving forward, that Scream Curse of Carnage would be now published digitally only for the single issues, and that later on the trade paperbacks will be published per print. So when did you learn that the book would start being published digitally only, and what was your reaction? How has this changed or altered your plans for the series?
Let me see how carefully I have to tread here, but I think it's okay for me to say I had written scripts for issue 9 by the time it was, the decision from up high was that, it would go digital. And, I am a fan of the hard copy. Like, I love having the comic in my hand. I love collecting. I love being able to flip through and kind of pull it off the shelf when I want to. So yeah, I mean, I was definitely saddened by the fact that we wouldn't be able to see all those cool variant covers, just so beautiful for 6. And I think it's the amount of work that went into these issues. And the amount of talent. I mean, like, you just want to hold on to it like a little protective blanket, protective symbiote blanket. But, I had also, previously to this, been able to write a series for Iron Fist called Phantom Limb, and that was, in essence, it was 6 issues that they kind of merged into 3, and then it was a digital only thing until it fused together for a trade paperback, and that was through Comixology, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, I for me, being able to tell these stories and to be able to tell this kind of story, these weird, wonky, horror infused stories, like if there are people who want to read that sort of stuff, whether that's print or on their tablets, like I feel very lucky. And to be honest, like having the chance to write for Scream for this long, I mean, I can't say it enough, and I feel like this is probably my one opportunity to say it as loud and clear as I can. It's really been because of the readership and the fandom that people have had for these characters that it's done as well as it has. And I have to say thank you to everybody who has read it and kept with it. It means the world to me. It's because of you all that I've been able to writing for it. So yeah, I mean, I have no idea what the future holds. I do know for a fact that there is nothing to blame other than the coronavirus for whatever decisions are made. It came at a point when this was really kind of shifting into a new gear, and the people who talked to me at Marvel were like, look, whatever happens, it has nothing to do with the quality of the work that we're putting out there, because they really did and do have faith in the story. It's just that we got sideswiped, sucker punched by this thing, and now this is really changing the kind of whole stratosphere of comics as we know it. Who knows what's going to happen?
The landscape.
Yeah. It's just completely different now.
I mean, I was going to say, like, with the COVID-19 going around, I mean, I don't mind supporting the book digitally, but at the same time, like you said, Clay, I really would have loved to get the physical copy, and all the variants that have come out for Scream have been phenomenal. And we here at the Venom community want to support the book as much as possible. So again, just thank you for putting out whatever you can.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I will say there were, like, I think I was working on 4 different things, and then the pause button got on all of them, except for one. And Marvel really wants this stuff out there. I know that. Just have to figure out how. So going forward, if anything, whether it's digital, whether it's print, however it ends up, it's just feel blessed that it's gone as far as it has, and frankly, that has to do because of you all. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, this is such a great series. Like, we are doing our best to make sure by word of mouth everyone knows it's a great series, and that even though it's gone digitally only, continue to read it, continue to subscribe to it, make sure everyone knows what you feel about it, because we want this thing to keep going as far as it can.
Absolutely. Look, I'm in love with the series. So.
Yeah.
Me too.
All right. So we have one last question from our host. Carlos, go ahead and end it for us, and then we'll move on to the community.
So Clay, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. So my last question will be, who are some other fictional comic characters that you would like to write in the future?
Oh man. I have a soft spot for Man-Thing. Has there been recently any Man-Thing storylines?
It was a couple years ago. I think R.L. Stine did a short mini for Man-Thing.
What? Really? Wow. Okay. Oh man. If and when I would die for a Man-Thing, we'll see. I never say never, but at this point, I feel like I've been very lucky to write about characters that have kind of gone gone to the wayside. But man thing, that's my answer. Man thing.
I'm all about it. Love me is a man thing.
All right,
But
excellent. So that does it for our questions. So now we're going to open the floor to our live listeners who have been following along. And we'll just pick out some good questions here for you. And then after that, we'll close out. Let me take a look here. So Asura says, I love the touch that Big Mother was made of Null's blood, which kind of giving her a resemblance to Carnage. But he's curious to know what inspired Mr. Chapman to turn Big Mother into a symbiote dragon and make her the Granbull symbiote dragon's sister, as opposed to keeping her purported connection to the dark elf Grendel from Thor.
It's funny because it is there are kind of these goalposts, and I will admit that, like, in terms of the symbiote dragons coming into the fold, like, I was less aware of Grendel and the Beowulf story with Thor up until kind of having this conversation with Marvel editorial and Big Mother. So when I started pitching Big Mama to them, we're like, oh, you have no idea how that kind of dovetails into all of this. Then we can kind of talk about this part of the story. And, I went back to the texts of Beowulf and thinking of, like, how kind of revisionist history we kind of is the saying. History is written by the victors, I guess. I took Beowulf, the poem, be the kind of version of history that the winners got to told, that Beowulf basically got to told. What if underneath that text there's a different kind of story? That essentially the images from our first arc would kind of either support or contrast, I guess. I basically took, a lot of that narration is just straight up Beowulf. The images can either kind of tell their own story that either, goes against it or argues against it. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's coming close to answering, but I do know that, like, in Null and the kind of the origin of his dragons, dovetailing into the Beowulf or mythology, I knew that I wanted to get to a place where Big Mother was mourning the loss of family. And that had to be the kind of driving force behind the death of Grendel, and how that compels, Big Mother goes into hiding for years and years and years and years. And I basically imagined her stewing in the briny depths for a long time, just waiting for God is coming. So it's time to kind of, like, come out of hiding and tap scream. Yeah, kind of gets close to answering the question, maybe, hopefully.
Yeah, I think it does.
All right. So yeah, and so here's a question from Twisted Lemon. Scream shares a lot of similarities to her quote unquote father in Venom in the Scream book. So her relationship with her host and some of her personality traits seem incredibly similar to how Venom was depicted in the 90s, with the relationship stuff you were going on about. So was that a conscious decision on your part, or is it just a coincidence?
I mean, I would say it's maybe, those were the comics that I read. So I feel like any kind of initial foundation for a symbiote story, I feel like it has to establish relationship. I know we went for 6 issues basically trying to navigate that relationship. I feel like that has to be any symbiote relationship begins, whether it would be me adhering myself to Scream or to Age or Riot or whoever. You have to kind of like navigate, like who's got their hands on the wheel here, like what's going on. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily a nod to Venom, but definitely my kind of core belief system of a symbiotic relationship has to be like, you have to figure this out.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I have another question. This one comes from Peaches. Basically, what was up with that alternative Scream design that showed up a few times in the variant covers, but was really never used in the comics? Is that one that kind of has the kind of burnt blackened head look with the really creepy eyes and mouth type of thing? Was that going to play some sort of
issue?
role?
Tell me which issue you guys are talking about.
Is
it?
I believe it was also shown on a action figure variant for Absolute Carnage number 5, I think.
I mean, I wish I could answer you. I don't know if I have an answer. I mean, Scream. I feel like everybody has their like.
It was Russell Dowderman, I believe, did the original design.
Oh yeah. I mean, I love this version of Scream. I feel like I don't know if I have an answer. I don't have an answer.
So this is out of your wheelhouse completely, not your decision.
I mean, I do know that like Scream can mean many things to many different people. So it wasn't so much that there was a conversation of like beyond Mooneyham and Brown kind of establishing like how they would draw Scream for the actual comic. I think the cover artists were allowed to go to town.
Okay.
Well, I for one am glad that it stuck more to a more classic design. Though I do kind of think it'd be cool if she had any like Mania inspired spikes or something. But I still love what the artists are doing. So
yeah. I especially love all of her transformations in those first few issues when she was diving underwater. It was like, wow, really playing with the amorphous part of that symbiote.
And I mean, I just watched episodes of Blue Planet, and I was like, what are the craziest underwater, like what are the deepest deep sea creatures that we could kind of bring to Scream mythology? And I mean, but you have to give it to Gary. Gary Brown did those. I mean, those were absolutely insane. Like he really went to town. I love it.
Scream Crab. So,
we have a question from Ali Scream, and she asks, the first 5 issues deal with a lot of Andy's mental health, including a suicide attempt and later realization that she wasn't alone because she has Scream. Suicidal thoughts can be a really hard topic to handle, and you handle it perfectly. What made you decide to include this element in the series, and what, if any, type of research or prep did you go do before you handed to be able to handle this topic well and in such a relatable way?
Wow. Well, first off, thank you. I mean, honestly, that was one of the bigger risks that we took with that first issue. And we wanted to handle it carefully. But honestly, I mean, for me, like I feel as if it was something that I didn't want to shy away from. And coming from a place of trying to understand where Andy was as a human being, independent of her relationship with Scream, it felt important kind of acknowledge that kind of sense of I keep coming back to the word of loneliness, but it was, for me, wanted Andy to feel not only alone, like that the world isn't providing any other option. Choices, doors were closing, everything kind of narrows itself down. into these very finite kind of tunnels where you can no longer see the light at the end of the tunnel. And Andy making that choice, I think it was a decision based upon this idea of like, rather than asking for help anymore, simply asking the question for help is too much. And I knew that Andy had gotten to a place where she was emotionally exhausted, fatigued. She had no family. She had no friend. She felt like she could ask. And even the sounds in her head, you know, I thought of like those first few pages where she's blocking out the one person, the one thing, the one entity, whatever, you know, that could offer help. Because it just reached a zenith point to her where she couldn't even extend a helping hand or ask for help. So, you know, on the bridge when she jumps, I really wanted it to come from a place where wasn't that she didn't have any options. It's that she personally couldn't see them. It's at the moment when she made the choice that actually activates Scream, that Scream finds their voice and stops Andy, like saves Andy. So it's almost like that was the turning point that Andy needed to let go and in essence give up in order for Scream to say no and basically galvanize Scream. You know, I don't want to say take over, but it kind of purposed Scream in a way that hadn't been there before.
Well, thank you very much for that answer.
Yep, thank you. Now we have time for one last question. This one comes from Symbiotic Atreus. And this has to do, this is an interesting question because I like this. Does the Curse of Carnage subtitle on your run mean that maybe you're mentally limiting what you're writing in the series and other directions you're going in? Or do you have a little more free reign? Because it's interesting that it is called Curse of Carnage, and I can kind of see, you know, how that affects the story overall.
Interesting fact. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I will, and I will suffer the consequences later. But originally it was going to be Daughter of Carnage. Scream, Daughter of Carnage. This opened up a larger conversation of gender and symbiotes, and are symbiotes gendered, and you know, thinking in terms of the fluidity of symbiotes, it isn't so much that Scream itself was the gendered identity of Carnage. That, you know, it would essentially be they, them, the offspring of Carnage rather than the kind of specific son or daughter. So Curse, I don't know when Curse came into the fold. Curse was basically what was decided for the series. And I think, you know, it's interesting that you ask about the limitations of that title. I think that you could kind of interpret it twofold. There's Carnage and then there's Curse. And Curse to me comes from a place of great pathos. And I think that, like, you know, we are the offspring of symbiotes, you know, Venom, Carnage, and there is a lot of baggage that comes with that, whether it's emotional, mental, physical. You know, I think Scream, of this kind of parentage, there's a lot that comes with that, and it's very traumatic. I took Curse in a way of like emotional or even mental kind of damage or trauma. Speaking specifically of our forebears and thinking of Carnage. Carnage, I mean, nothing that character has done is isn't cursed, in my opinion. So, yeah, I think maybe it had a little commercial appeal to it because Carnage is, everything has to, absolute carnage was the kind of forebear. So this was the kind of tie-in to that. I think at one point it was going to be that the second arc would not have the Carnage, the Curse of Carnage kind of moniker to it. I don't know if we were able to kind of shake it or not, but we did have the subtitle "Suffer the Children," which was going to be the kind of, to me, it's like Scream, suffer the little children.
Yeah,
Well, very interesting answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think Curse of Carnage is very fitting in that it harkens back to like the classic Marvel horror comics and even classic horror films. It's like the Curse of Dracula or whatever. It's like it tells you exactly what you're going to get in the story, and that's a horror story. I think that works very well. And then
I'm very happy with the name change.
Yeah, especially now that you've told us that it was going to be Daughter of Carnage, because us being Venom fans and sticklers for continuity, we'd have to be like, not really the daughter.
Sister of Carnage at best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And just a note to our listeners, make sure to pick up Scream Curse of Carnage and let your friends and Marvel know how much you enjoyed it. Get issues 1 through 5 for $1.99 USD per issue right now on Comixology. And if you're loving the book, make sure to subscribe digitally via Comixology or the Marvel Comics app and leave a rating. Let's keep this train moving. That's all the time we have with Clay for now, but the fun doesn't end there, fellow Venomaniacs. Join us for a new live recording on Friday, June 26th at 7:30 p.m. Pacific, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, for another special podcast episode featuring a crossover with Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast and one of our partners at The Collective, for our review of Disney XD's Spider-Man Maximum Carnage cartoon, Episode 3. You can listen to We Are Venomaniacs on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Music and iTunes, Google Play Music, and YouTube. We can also be found on Twitter at WAV_podcast. Check out our Discord server where you can geek out with a community of Venomaniacs like us. As always, thank you to my fellow co-hosts Carlos and Tyler for joining me today.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, of course. I'm so happy to be here. And just before we end off, we got 2 minutes. Any last things you want to say to the fans, Clay?
I'll say it and say it again. I mean, this thing is alive because of readers like you. And, who knows what the future holds, but, I have never felt more embraced and, supported in a story than I have with Scream. So thank you to all the readers. You have kept it alive for this long, and it's because of you that it'll keep going. So thank you.
Yes, and an extra special to thank you to Clay for taking the time to chat with a few of his fans. So that's it for us. Another thank you to the Venom site for permitting us to make this podcast on the TVS banner and all of your generous support. And finally, thank you, loyal listeners and fellow Venomaniacs. You guys make an awesome community, and it's an honor to be your voice on the airwaves. Together, we are Venomaniacs. And now a word from one of our partners at The Collective, a network of superhero podcasts.
The swamp, more than merely a place. It is a churning, seething, bubbling bed of life, of which you are a part. Once you were a man, a chemist named Ted Salas, until one little experiment went somewhat awry. And you changed. The serum that was to have made you a super soldier, combined with the strange forces in the swamp, to make you over into this, a shambling, mindless mockery of your former humanity. The macabre Man-Thing.
Man-Thing was created in the early 1970s to capitalize on the growing monster craze, but under writer Steve Gerber it became something quite different. Experimental, surreal, and very, very weird. It was something I loved as a kid, but does it still hold up today, 4 decades after its initial publication? So join me, Paul Matthew Carr, as I attempt to make sense of this cult classic and analyze each issue, putting it in the context of the time it was written and comparing it to the standards of today. And maybe you too can come to love the world's second most famous swamp-based comic book character as much as I do. The Nexus of All Realities, a Man-Thing podcast, a twice-monthly dive into the bizarre.